the Dagger brush is my favorite brush because it can just do so many things, from a thin line to a thick line to a beautiful petal and everything in between. So today I'm going to demonstrate the Dagger brush on a beautiful wild rose. I have lots of daggers, and these are all now from Rosemary & Co. I just love the quality of their brushes, and they're so reasonably priced. I've had this Sable Blend Dagger Series 772 for years, and it's still in excellent condition. For the rose today, I'm using both the Series 772 half-inch Sable Blend and also a 3/8 inch Shiraz Dagger. If you don't have both sizes, you can easily do it with one. To start with, I'm wetting my paper with some clean water, and then because I don't want the paper to be too wet, I'm gently blotting it off with some tissue paper. And now applying a little bit of very thin yellow for the center. Here's a quick demo of how I approach my petals. Firstly, I need to wet my brush absolutely thoroughly and then blot it off. Load my brush with some creamy paint right on the end. Then, to achieve this graduated effect, I need to hold my brush as parallel to the paper as I can, because the paint is on the tip but the wood is in the belly, and they both need to touch the paper surface at the same time. For this wild rose, I'm choosing to dip about 2 or 3 millimeters of my brush into the paint. And now I'm ready. So with the whole sword of the brush, I'm laying in these petals, every second one to start with, and then I'll fill in the gaps. It's a really good idea to rewash and reload your brush for every single stroke, because you can never tell if you have enough paint and water in there for the next stroke. The key to all these strokes is purely practice, keeping the brush clean, loaded with water without dripping, and creamy paint on the tip, and then keeping the brush low to the paper and allowing it to move freely. I'm allowing the second row of petals to show more of the sides of the petals. Feel free to turn your paper as much as you need to allow your hand to move freely. The tip of the brush is very fine and ideal to pull in some wrinkles or lines from the red paint on the edges. I'm giving this rose a third layer or row of petals, and this one here in the middle will be turned up a little bit, creating a little bit of a shadow over the center. I'm adding yellow ochre to the center of the rose, and the paper is still very damp. And then for the next layer on top, adding some burnt sienna to the yellow ochre to make it a bit darker. I liked the slightly folded petal on the reference photo, so I decided to do the same to this one. I'm using a Rosemary & Co. short Shiraz, which is ideal for lifting, and lifting some of that petal out, which now overlaps the center of the rose. I feel I've done enough on the flower for now, so I'm onto the leaves. With some French ultramarine blue and yellow ochre and lemon yellow, I'm mixing a warmish green and laying in a little twig that goes underneath the flower diagonally. Again, the Dagger brush proves to be ideal for creating lines and leaves. The fine point and strong body also make it ideal to work your way in and around the curly edges of the petal. I'm adding more French ultramarine to my green mix for a darker mix, also a creamier mix, and then dropping in some little shadows, especially underneath the petals. But the mix has to be creamier. Moving up to the higher leaves up the page, I'm adding some more water to this mix because I don't really want the leaves up there to be as heavy. Maybe There could be a leaf sticking out here. The Dagger brush gives you so much opportunity for, it's like using a thin brush. We can do that and maybe make a leaf come around like that. And with some blue, maybe a little bit of shadow in there. The leafy shapes don't have to be like perfect leaves. They can be any shape. And here I'm just adding a few little connecting lines that just connect things. It's always good when they join up. There's something really satisfying to the mind for the viewer's eye. It's easier to navigate your way around the painting when there's a road to follow. And now I need to let it all dry so that I can add in some shadows later. And incidentally, you may want to join us over at school where we take a deep dive into all these strokes. My painting's dry now, so it's time for a few shadows. I have some quinacridone rose up here. I only need the tiniest little bit of neutral tint. See how very minute that is? And it's also very thin. I'll add a little bit more. One of the benefits of having one of these tilted palettes, water runs down to one part and you can have your thicker, creamier paint up the top there. My shadow colour is very pale, but likewise the petals are very delicate. And it's always a good idea to test the colour on a scrap piece of paper before applying. I'm using this colour for the shadows under the lower petals. I absolutely love how the sturdy point allows me to navigate around the flower and allow me to seamlessly create little shadows underneath the petals. And this might be a little petal in here, so we could give that a little shadow. To create a shadow colour, we can either use the complement, which in this case would be a bit of purple, or the above rose plus neutral. If I was only to add neutral, it would go a bit green. So on this occasion, yes, I'm using the complement, which is the purpley colour. And if you're now asking, so when do I use neutral and when do I use the complement? You just have to test it and see what looks better, what looks more natural, more believable. I'm thinking that that petal is casting a bit of a shadow over here. Wiping my brush out, but I need a little bit more. It's in there. Wondering where else we can put a little shadow, maybe a little bit in there. So now let's move over to the green, lemon yellow, phthalo blue, and a little bit of neutral tint. I'm adding a little bit of red to it to make it a little bit browner because my existing leaves on the warm side. So I'm putting down a center line. And I might put a little bit of shadow around the sides there. And then into the middle, burnt sienna with the very tip of the dagger. But I do like putting a little bit of colour from the flower into the leaves. And with the side of the dagger, you can even lift out some veins if you really wanted to. Just a few here and there. And I'm just going to strengthen the shadow underneath, just in there. And there's our wild rose. So the dagger brush can really bring you heaps of joy. If you'd like to learn more, see this playlist here.